One thing we've learned during this time of shelter in place, lockdown, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, is that you need a space at home to work. The idea of a home office isn't new, but I'd contend that ambitious people need not only an office, but some kind of studio as well. And today's distinction is about my concept of a home office studio.
Distinctions for Life, helping you get what you really want in life with small changes that make a big difference.
I'm Ron Davis, and I help ambitious people get what they really want in life by giving them the tools and distinctions to make an impact and build something new. These distinction videos are one way that I do that. A new way that I'm going to be doing this is a course and mastermind that will begin soon. This online program where you will learn how to get clarity about what you want, make a plan to get it, and gain accountability to follow through. If you'd like more details, go to the link in the description or godfl.link. One of my houses had a wet bar in the living room. It was built in the 70s, and this was common and considered fancy. All the houses in the neighborhood had an alcove with a sink and a cabinet in them. When we moved in the early 2000s, we had no idea what to do with that thing. Eventually, we had the whole area turned into a big pantry since it was very near the kitchen. So why am I telling you this in a video about a home studio? Because it is an example of how architecture changes over time, specifically residential architecture in this case. In the 1970s, people needed to mix drinks in the living room, I guess. But by 2000, no one did that, especially when the kitchen was 5 steps away, and that was where everyone congregated during parties. The same is true for a formal dining room. That house had one, and my current house has one. But how many of us really need an extra room just for fancy eating? We turn our formal dining rooms into libraries. But I know a lot of people turn those formal dining rooms into offices. Even before the pandemic, many people worked from home and needed a dedicated space to work, which led to the concept of a house needing a home office. But the idea of an office at home isn't new. While working solely from home was less common in the past, many did work while at home. My father had a dedicated office in every home we lived in growing up, but always worked in an office downtown. What is new is a need for space for content creation. People trying to make something in the world, start a business or a nonprofit, have an impact, create a movement, now have huge opportunities to get their message out. If you remember back to the Money Flow Framework Attention episode, I encourage people to build a platform or online content channel. Add to that the need to use advanced communication tools like teleconferencing software, and you can see why you should consider having a space dedicated to it. How many Zoom calls have you been on in the last 2 months? How many people on those calls had a place dedicated to work in their home? How many had a space dedicated to video calls and content creation? Very few, I'd guess. Why not have a space dedicated to that? Or combine the two? When building a home office, think about how you will use it to create video and audio content. So I hereby coin the term home office studio, or maybe home studio office. Leave a comment below on what sounds better. Okay, so let's talk about the factors of a good home office studio. I'll use my office as a basis and show you a little bit behind the scenes. First and foremost, a home office studio is isolated. You have to have a space where other people aren't going to interrupt you, where you can control the sound, and the best place is to have your own room. When we were looking at houses, having my own office was a must. I worked from home at the time, and I needed a dedicated space to work in. What we found was a mid-century modern house with a rather large room on one end. The house was built in the 1960s, and the guy who built it had lived in it, and he ran a construction business out of it and had an office, workshop, garage on one end. This had been a number of things over the life of the house, but it was a disaster when we moved in. The immediate previous owners were turning it into a man cave with a room for brewing beer. But the place had concrete floors and no drywalls for most of it. We told them to stop doing any building because I knew I wanted an office, and that's not what they were building. Eventually, like a year later when we could afford it, we paid someone to finish it off, paint it, and carpet it. We also turned the disaster area brew room into a large closet. This now holds a lot of gear and hobby supplies. All of our house has hard floors, wood, tile, and all things brick. But we had carpet put down in the office. It's the only place in the house that is carpeted. There were a number of reasons for this, but one is our next point: sound. When you are going to record anything, you would prefer a space with a lot of soft surfaces. Why? Because soft surfaces absorb sound and hard ones bounce it around. Putting carpet on the floor significantly lowered the echo in the room. This room also has large drapes over the windows which absorb more sound, so acoustically it's pretty good. Next, you need to think of your space as a set. For all video projects, you need to think about your set. What is in the foreground and the background of your shot? How far are you from the camera, and how far are you from the background? These are important factors in a number of ways. The distance from the camera influences what kind of camera and lens you can use, which we'll talk about in a minute. As I mentioned in my How to Look Good on Webcam Part 1 video, your background is important. When making content or for video calls, people are going to be looking at what is behind you. My background is okay. I don't particularly like the door behind me, but I haven't figured out how to remove it. The bookcase is on purpose. It gives an intellectual vibe. I also know that people are going to look at the books they can see, so I regularly change some of them just to see who's paying attention. A prominent book that is often covered is probably even a little controversial. I'll leave that as an exercise for you to figure out which one I'm talking about. One last thing about bookshelves. If you have a bunch of books directly behind you, some autofocus systems will lock on them rather than on your face. Especially true for older cameras without face tracking. You see, early autofocus systems looked for vertical lines when focusing. If you watch videos from this time period, you will often see people whose faces are out of focus, but the bookshelf 3 feet behind them is in focus. This is very hard to see on the small screens of most cameras, so take some video and watch the playback. If you find that your camera wants to lock on your background, then lock it on your face and set it over to manual focus. Which brings us to the first thing everybody wants to talk about when creating content: the gear. We do love the gear. The first question people ask me when they want to up their game on photography or podcasting or video is, what kind of gear do you use? I want to say first that you don't need a ton of fancy gear to create quality conference. You need even less to do a quality video conference call. That is much more about lighting and camera angle than it is about the gear. I'm going to leave a complete studio tour for another episode. And my list of equipment has always been in the description of every DFL 2.0 video, including this one. My gear is probably overkill for what most people need. In reality, for most of what you want to shoot that will be edited, you could use the camera on your phone. For live, it is a little more complicated, but not in the hardware. A phone's camera works fine for streaming, but its form factor makes being part of a meeting harder, especially if you are a host. There are a lot of controls in apps like Zoom and Skype, etc., that don't work as well in the mobile app as they do in the desktop. For sound, get yourself a decent podcasting mic or a clip-on lavalier, and your sound will be good enough. And make sure you have good light. A window is one way to do this, but there are a lot of inexpensive LED-based light panels out there. I use 2 of these for my lights in my videos. Again, look at the description for what I use and hit the subscribe button to see a complete tour of the studio in the near future. Lastly, you need a good internet connection. If possible, a wired one rather than Wi-Fi. Though I use Wi-Fi because my cable modem is far from my office. When picking an internet connection, pay attention to upload as well as download speed. If you're going to be doing live streaming or a lot of calls, that upload gets really important very soon. This distinction should give you something to think about for your current or future home office studio. Question of the day: do you have a space dedicated to content creation in your house? comment below. Thanks for watching today. If you liked what you saw, give me a thumbs up. This channel is all about helping you get what you really want in life with small changes that make a big difference. Until next time, I'm Ron Davis. When we moved in the early 2000s, we had no idea what to do with that thing. Why? Because soft surfaces, boy, that's a tough word to say. And now that I've noticed it, it's gonna be even worse. But its form factor makes being part of a meeting harder.